I was driving back from visiting my boyfriend at his college. The drive was about 3 hours, mostly on an expressway through a rural area. It was late, and it was very dark. Suddenly, the steering wheel started shaking badly, and I had no choice but to pull over. Luckily, there was a rest stop right there, so I was able to pull off the highway. My friend was with me, completely drunk and of no help at all. I got out of the car to see what had happened and found my tire was nearly flat. Now, this was years ago when cell phones existed, but the service was awful. I opened the trunk to get the jack and spare tire, and that's when 2 guys approached to offer help. Keep in mind, it was the middle of the night at a rural rest stop, so I was cautious, but I needed the help. I can change a tire, but it's not easy, and it always takes me longer than I want to admit, so I let the guys assist me. But very quickly, I realized these guys had no clue what they were doing. While I was trying to get rid of them, my drunk friend stumbled out of the car and started chatting with them. I managed to drag her back inside, but now I was starting to get seriously uncomfortable and nervous. That's when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a car pulling out from a dark corner of the parking lot. 2 new guys pulled up, and before they even got out of their car, the first 2 guys hurriedly rushed back to their car and left. The new guys got out and, without saying a word, quickly changed my tire. Once they were done, I thanked them, and they just nodded before leaving, without saying a word. Who were those guys? How long had they been sitting in the shadows watching us? I've often thought about them over the past 20 years, and I still wish them well. Were they just helpful strangers, or was there something more to it? I'll never know for sure. But sometimes, I can't help but wonder if they were there for a different reason than I thought. This happened to me just a few years ago, during winter break while I was still in college. If there ever was a break for me, I'd usually drive back to my hometown where my parents lived to spend time with them. It was a pretty long drive, but I never wanted to stay at a hotel. They were always creepy, dirty, and the last time I stayed in one, junkies broke into my car, so I did everything I could to avoid them. I usually don't stop for anything except gas when driving long distances, but on this night, I was exhausted. I found myself getting drowsy behind the wheel, nearly dozing off. I knew the dangers of driving while tired, so I didn't want to risk it. At that point on the highway, I knew there wasn't a hotel for miles, so I decided to pull into a deserted rest stop off the highway to get some rest. The rest stop was right next to a dense forest, and it even had an outhouse. I let out a sigh of relief. My stomach had been in knots for the entire trip, and I was desperate. I climbed out into the cold, crisp air and walked to the outhouse, locking myself inside. Now, under normal circumstances, I would have never even considered using a filthy outhouse on the side of a highway. But I was desperate, and I knew I'd sleep better if I took care of things first. Sitting there, the only sound I could hear was the rustling of the trees in the winter breeze. That's when I first heard it. The sound of slow footsteps thumping in the woods behind me, followed by heavy breathing. I froze, holding my breath, trying to stay as still as possible. I didn't move, just listened. Whoever it was, they weren't going away. After what felt like 10 minutes, the footsteps got closer to the outhouse. Then, I heard the person moving around the outhouse, their presence growing nearer until they were right behind the door. Suddenly, 5 hard pounds hit the door, making the entire outhouse shake. I jumped, but I quickly assumed the person just needed to use the bathroom. Still, something felt off. Who would be out in the woods next to a deserted highway in the middle of the night? I hurried to finish up, but as I yanked my pants back up, the outhouse began to shake violently. The person outside was pulling on the door like their life depended on it. My heart raced as I called out, trying to buy some time. 1 second, I shouted. The door continued to shake for what felt like an eternity, then stopped abruptly. I heard the footsteps retreating to the other side of the outhouse. My hands were trembling as I cautiously unlocked the door, hoping to make a run for it. I swung the door open and almost fell right into a nightmare. Standing just inches from me was a crazed man, his face pressed against the passenger side window of my car. His eyes were wide, wider than the moon itself, and he had a terrifying, toothy grin on his face. He slammed his hands against the glass, laughing maniacally. "What do you want?" I screamed, panic flooding my voice. Without a word, he reached down and tried to open the passenger door. Without thinking, I slammed the car into drive and sped out of there, tires screeching as I swerved back onto the highway. I dared not look back. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw him standing under the lone lamppost, watching me drive away. I didn't stop. I kept driving, speeding down the highway until I couldn't take it anymore. After 45 minutes, I pulled into a gas station to catch my breath and calm down. It's been years, but that image of that man's twisted face is burned into my memory. I still wonder, though, what would have happened if he had gotten that door open? I'll never forget the eerie feeling of him watching me from under that lamppost. I can't shake the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't made it out of there. Sometimes, I wonder if that man was just a random psycho or something far worse. I was on an army assignment, driving from San Antonio to Tacoma with 6 days to report. I planned to drive hard on the first day to enjoy a mini vacation in Utah. It was January, so I left early to maximize daylight. The road stretched from San Antonio to the Great Plains and then to New Mexico. I stopped in Roswell for a bit of sightseeing before continuing west toward Albuquerque. By the time I reached Gallup, the sun was setting, and I had 2 hours to go before my stop in Cortez. Route 491 led me into the Navajo Nation, with nothing but prairie and mountains on both sides. As the sky darkened, I noticed a figure on the road, someone walking alone in the middle of nowhere, no lights or safety gear. As I passed, my stereo cut out. The figure raised his arm to flag me down. I saw a man in a wool poncho and cowboy boots, eyes wide open, locked on me. I shook it off as my imagination, but then something strange happened. I looked in my rear view mirror. He was gone. As I drove on, I saw the figure again. Same man. Same eerie look. He jumped in front of my car, forcing me to swerve. His clothes were now ragged, his hair wild. I sped up, but he kept pace with me, running alongside my car, matching my speed. Panicked, I looked for the nearest town, Shiprock, and pushed my car as fast as it could go. At 120 miles per hour, the creature still kept up, but as I neared Shiprock, it suddenly stopped, slipping into the darkness. Relieved, I made it to town safely. A week later, I shared my experience with a fellow soldier. She mentioned that Route 491 is known for paranormal activity and warned me about the legends tied to it. Google what Route 491 used to be called, she said. Everything will make sense. It wasn't your typical spooky situation, but when I was 20, I found myself in a nightmare that still haunts me. I was driving home after a long day, expecting an 8-hour trip, but fate had other plans. A traffic accident slowed everything down, and before I knew it, the hours were slipping by, and I was running low on options. I was tired, too tired to care that I couldn't afford a hotel. I just wanted to get home. It was about 11 p.m., and I was already 4 hours away from my destination. The highway was desolate, the kind of stretch where the only thing you can see for miles is the endless road ahead. I noticed a car behind me, but I didn't think much of it. Probably just someone going the same way. The thing is, this car didn't just pass me like any normal vehicle. It stayed behind me for over an hour. At first, I shrugged it off. But then, I pulled into a gas station for an energy drink. The car pulled into the parking lot across the street, but didn't get out. It just sat there, engine idling. I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were just stopping for a break too. When I left, the car followed me again. I told myself I was overthinking things, but after driving for another hour, I stopped at a rest stop to use the bathroom. The car, still behind me. It parked at the entrance but didn't move. At that point, a creeping feeling washed over me. This wasn't just coincidence. I wasn't crazy. I pulled over at the next pullout just to see if they would follow again. Sure enough, they did. They stopped too, across the road. Still, they didn't get out. They just sat there, staring. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart was pounding and I didn't know what to do. I was still 2 hours from home. I decided to call my parents to tell them what was going on. They told me to drive to downtown and make 4 left turns. I did as they said, and to my horror, the car followed me every step of the way. It wasn't until I was almost at the police station that I realized I was being led into a trap. My parents told me to pull in, and as soon as I did, the car sped off, like 50 km/h over the speed limit. Gone. I ran into the station, breathless, terrified. I reported everything. The cops sent a patrol officer to check it out, but I never heard anything after that. The weirdest part? To this day, I still have no idea what that person wanted. Was it just a coincidence? Or was I being followed for a reason? If you're driving alone at night, always be aware of who's behind you. This happened about 15 years ago, but to this day, I can't shake the feeling of what happened that night. I was in college 4 hours away from my hometown, and I'd occasionally drive home for the weekend to visit family and old friends. My parents were divorced but lived in the same county, so I'd bounce between their houses. My dad lived in a small apartment, but I usually stayed at my mom's ranch house way out in the countryside, miles away from anyone. One weekend, I was out with friends at a late-night techno bowling event and ended up driving back to my mom's house around 2 a.m., completely alone on these desolate country roads. The roads were empty, nothing but trees and fields around me, which wasn't unusual. I was used to the quiet. But then, something happened that still haunts me. I noticed a car behind me. At first, I thought it was nothing. Just another driver, probably going in the same direction. But then the car started swerving, drifting left and right, dangerously close to my bumper. I could feel my heart rate pick up as it stayed glued to me. I'm on these dark, empty roads with no one else in sight, and this car just won't leave me alone. At this point, I'm freaking out. The car had every chance to pass me, but it didn't. It just kept swerving, staying too close for comfort. My mind raced. What if it's some maniac with bad intentions? What if I stop and they attack me? I couldn't take that risk. So I did the only thing that made sense in that moment. I started driving in circles. I took random turns, trying to shake the car off, hoping they'd get the hint and leave me alone. But no, the car stayed right behind me, weaving and swerving like a predator on my tail. Now, in full panic mode, I decided to head toward the town where I'd been hanging out earlier. It was still early, and I knew the main road would have more cars, more lights. Maybe that would deter whoever was following me. I got onto a well-lit, faster route, but the car stayed with me, matching my speed. I was freaking out. I couldn't think straight. In a rash, panic-fueled decision, I swerved into an exit ramp at the last second, hoping the other car wouldn't follow. It worked. The car missed the exit and had to go up to the next one miles down the road. Breathing a little easier, I pushed the pedal to the floor and sped through the city, flying down roads at 30-40 miles over the limit, my eyes darting to every set of headlights in the rearview mirror. The adrenaline was pumping. I made it back to my mom's house without any further incidents, but I couldn't stop shaking. Every set of headlights felt like it could be that car again. To this day, I still get a chill whenever I drive those country roads at night. What was that car's deal? Was it just a coincidence or something darker? I'll never know. This happened last August when I went on a road trip with a friend. It was around 10 p.m. and we were driving along the 18-mile-long Atchafalaya Bridge, heading toward New Orleans. The whole area has this eerie vibe, the massive cypress trees. On either side of you, the pitch-black darkness, and nothing but swamp beneath the bridge for miles. It was quiet, unsettling even. We were driving, minding our business, when we noticed a man walking on the highway, right in the shoulder. At first, it didn't seem too strange considering we were in the middle of nowhere. But then we realized he wasn't just walking normally, he was stumbling along in a weird, almost limping way, dressed in torn, shredded clothes. His clothes were hanging off of him, almost as if they were falling apart. He looked pale, like unnaturally pale, with a strange, almost glowing sheen to his skin. Honestly, the whole thing gave off a ghostly vibe. Now here's where it gets creepy. I, the passenger, turned around just as we passed him, and nothing. He was gone, completely gone. We had just passed him, and there was no sign of him behind us. No figure in the distance, no shadow. It wasn't even that it was too dark to see. There were other cars on the road, so we should have seen him in their headlights. I know, it's easy to jump to conclusions. Maybe he was just a person in bad circumstances. No clean clothes, nowhere to go, struggling to get somewhere. That's a far more likely explanation. But there's no denying it. The way he looked, the way he disappeared into thin air, felt like something out of a ghost story. No matter who or what he was, though, the whole thing was strange, to say the least. I like to think we drove past a phantom of the swamp. Apparition or not, I just hope that guy is okay.